Good evening. Hello. I'm Pastor Chris, and on behalf of Bethel Lutheran and the Bethel Adult Ed Committee, we are so glad you're with us tonight because we think this is a really important and timely matter that we need to be discussing. Some of you probably remember, maybe some of you remember, that this was originally scheduled for January, closer to the Super Bowl, when there was all this talk about sex trafficking going on and so forth, and we got snowed out. So we squeaked by this time with the reschedule by like 1 day. So I think that's okay too, because it's important to be talking about it continuously, not just at big event times. Now the basic purpose for this evening is to increase our awareness about this problem, either for sexual or labor purposes, and also for us to know how we can identify potential trafficking situations and report them properly to the authorities that need to know, because there's probably some things in there that we're unaware of, and we'll hear about that tonight. This session, just so you know, I have this up here so I can get this exactly correct, is being videotaped and can be seen on the North Hudson Community Access Television, Comcast Cable Channels 6 and 15, or on River Channel's YouTube connection. Most of the time, the camera will be focused up here on the speaker or over on the table when we get to the panel discussion part. So don't worry, we're not going to be zooming in on your faces or anything. That's not our plan tonight. And also, I'd like to direct your attention to the table in the back. Casting Light has some information back there. They're a Hudson-based organization, Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and they have some pamphlets back there with some really staggering statistics. If you haven't picked one of them up, please do. They also have a list of human trafficking warning signs from Fierce Freedom that you can take home, which is also good information. And so with that, we're going to start with prayer, and then I'll invite Steve up to introduce our speaker. Let us pray. Lord, thank you for this evening to gather together to learn about this very difficult topic. As we are kind of blown away thinking about the darkness and evil that exists in the world, we still are yet aware that you are the light, and the light always casts out the darkness. So we just pray that you continue to do that, that you use us for your purposes in that matter, however we may be of use. And we just pray for an end to this horrific human trafficking. Be with all the people in this room this evening. In your name we pray. Amen. And here's Steve.
Thank you, Pastor. I'd like to extend my welcome to folks here too as well. I'd like to say a few more words about Casting Light. It's a community coalition of over 20 agencies and organizations that come together to create systems to fight human trafficking in the St. Croix Valley. They include members of area schools, law enforcement, human services, churches, women's shelters, businesses, and more. They were formed a little over a year ago. And that almost probably coincided with an earlier presentation that was given at the Hudson High School. There was a Sergeant Grant Snyder that came out from Minneapolis that gave the presentation. And Casting Light was instrumental in organizing that function. And back at that table are Tammy and Pastor Matt. Pastor Matt has agreed to be one of our panelists later on during the Q&A session. We have two speakers tonight who will be part of the panel discussion as well after their talks. Our fourth panelist will be Lieutenant Kathy Borgschatz. Raise your hand, Kathy. She is a Special Services Lieutenant for the St. Croix County Sheriff's Office. Please hold questions until the panel assembles after the presentations. And also, you'll have one of these handheld mics to speak into so that we can record it properly for the videotaping and hear each other. But get it like this. Seems to work best then. These are better than they used to be, but they still need attention that way. Our first speaker will be Jody Emerson from Fierce Freedom in Eau Claire. Jody is Director of Public Policy and Community Relations at Fierce Freedom, which is a nonprofit that raises awareness and educates the public about domestic human trafficking. Jody has always been an active member of her community by volunteering for a variety of different organizations, and I had dinner with her and she gives 2 or 3 of these a week, so you are a very busy person and committed to this task. But when she learned that this was happening in the community she lived in, she knew that she had to be part of the solution. She's a member of the Wisconsin Anti-Human Trafficking Force and co-chairs the implementation work group of the task force. She is also a member of the Wisconsin Anti-Trafficking Consortium and was the developer of the Be Aware campaign, which is a training program that fights human trafficking in the hospitality industry. We have a second speaker I'll introduce her later when her time is here. It's Jody.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. Can you guys all hear me? Mic's on? Okay, good. So like Steve said, our organization, we're based out of Eau Claire, and we really travel all around. At first, we just kind of started with the Chippewa Valley, but we're up here today. We'll be in the Milwaukee area on Sunday, so we've really gone from a regional to really a statewide organization. And our whole purpose is to get people talking about a subject that nobody wants to talk about. That really is what it comes down to. And so our ultimate goal is to be put out of business. You know, we would love to be talking about this enough so that everybody knows about human trafficking and we're all looking out for it and we're all doing something about it, and eventually nobody is getting involved in human trafficking anymore. My path to being involved with Fierce Freedom, it's kind of a funny little path, to be honest. I was that overly involved mom. So with my bio that Steve was reading saying that I was involved in community organizations, the real part of it is I was the helicopter mom. When my kids were in grade school, I was the PTA parent and the PTA president. And then when they moved on to Girl Scouts, I was the Girl Scout leader. And when they moved on to soccer, I was the soccer manager. And when they, every activity that they did, I was involved in. And my kids did this really annoying thing and they grew up. And I was kind of losing my projects, and I was at this point where I was either going to need to find a new project or I was going to have to start talking to my husband. So I started volunteering at Fierce Freedom. And really what happened is some friends of ours brought a movie into town. My husband works at the local newspaper, and so they called him and said, hey, can you do a story about this? We really think that this story needs to get out about this movie that we're bringing in. And so he did a piece of it, and in his career as a journalist, and he's been a newspaper reporter for 27 years now or something like that, he's covered some really terrible things. When he talked to a survivor of human trafficking, when he got home from work that night, he said, I can't eat supper. I need to just go walk around the neighborhood. And we walked around our neighborhood for about 3 hours before he was able to transition from work back to home life. And I thought, wow, this is really something. If this is affecting him so much, I really need to figure out what was going on. And so we went to this movie, and it was, it stabbed me in the gut kind of movie. And I was just amazed at people being so low. And this was a movie based about international trafficking over in India, that these people could say, you're better, to their kids, you're better off without me in your life. I'm going to give you to somebody else. Now, it happened that the person that they gave them to in this movie was a trafficker, and these kids were exploited from there. But it hit me, and maybe it was because my youngest was going away to college and that empty nest syndrome was looming large or something like that. But it struck me, and I thought, I need to do something about this. And as I was walking out of the theater, somebody was handing out sheets of paper. And I mean, I was doing the ugly cry in the theater. I mean, it was bad. It was, and somebody's handing out pieces of paper, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they're so smart. They're handing out Kleenexes. This is wonderful. And I grab one, and I'm going, oh wait, it's a brochure. And it was a sheet of paper that said, human trafficking happens here. Find out more, come to this meeting. And we had a community meeting in Eau Claire, and this was about 5 years ago now. And I thought, this is happening here. Why am I not seeing this? And then I talked to a survivor a couple of days after that meeting. And the meeting hit me, and I said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. To the executive director, I said, I don't know what I can do, but I'll do whatever you need me to do. But I'm not going to speak in front of groups. I've got a lot of connections with the media. My husband works there. All of our friends are with the media and all this kind of stuff. And I'll get you connected. We can get a lot of media coverage for this. But I'm not going to do any interviews because that's just too weird. They're my friends that would. I'm the spokesperson for Fierce Freedom. So, as soon as you draw a line in the sand and say, I'll do whatever, but not this, that, and the other thing, it's almost like God laughs and says, you're going to do exactly this. So all the things that I said, I'll do anything but this, that, and the other thing, this, that, and the other thing are now my job description, actually. But I sat down with the survivor and I said, tell me about this. And this is 5 years ago. We didn't have articles to read. We didn't have reports to read. If we wanted to find out what was going on, we actually had to talk to people. So I sat down with the survivor and I said, tell me about it. How big of a problem is this in Eau Claire? What are you seeing? Who do you know? That kind of stuff. And she started naming names. And the area that I live in Eau Claire is it's an old neighborhood. It was built in the 20s, and so the houses are right on top of each other. And we're in an area that everybody, the kids were in elementary school, everybody walks their kids to elementary school and back. And she named a girl who was a year older than my oldest daughter. And she grew up a block down and a block over from us. So I literally followed this girl back and forth to school for 5 years. That's when it hit me that, yes, it wasn't my daughter, but it could have been my daughter. That it wasn't just happening in my community, it was happening literally in my neighborhood, under my nose. And that's when I knew I had to do something about it. And so I've never been personally touched by human trafficking. I'm not a survivor of it. My kids aren't a survivor of it. Nobody in my family was, but they could have been. And that's when it hit me that I need to do something about it. My personal feeling is if we wait for social justice issues to hit us in our family, when we see them out in the community, we've waited too long to do something about it. And so that's when I got passionate about human trafficking, and that's when I worked to put a stop to it.
Every day we go about our lives driven by routine and blindfolded to the realities of the world around us. Our vision is clouded by the very normalcy we take for granted. Countless victims of human trafficking walk among us, seemingly invisible. Until now. The Blue Campaign provides a unified voice for those who oppose the heinous crime of human trafficking. Whether it's forced labor, domestic servitude, or the sex trade, it's time we open our eyes.
Sorry, I didn't even see you.
No one ever does.
Learn what you can do to help by visiting dhs.gov/bluecampaign.
So there was too many dials in here to figure out which one was volume, so I apologize that it was a little quieter. I love this video from the Blue Campaign, not only because it shows labor trafficking, domestic servitude, sex trafficking, but also because it gives you a great resource. Blue Campaign is something that's done by our federal government. There's a lot of great toolkits and posters that you can download from that website, so it's a great piece to know about. So what is human trafficking? It's really modern day slavery. It's where somebody's controlling and exploiting somebody else for their profit and gain. We have two different pieces. There's labor trafficking, and in our area, we see that in restaurants, in nail salons, in the agricultural industry, especially some larger farms. We really have concerns that a lot of the farm workers are there under labor trafficking situations. We've even had some situations in the Chippewa Valley where illicit massage parlors have some labor trafficking. Human trafficking is hard to build a case on. I'm sure you'll talk about it later, but they are hard cases to build. Labor trafficking is really hard because when we see it, all of us look at that as a normal job. Oftentimes in our area, there's a language barrier there with somebody who is a victim of labor trafficking. And so as you're in a restaurant, what are you supposed to do? Say, excuse me, so are you held here under force, fraud, or coercion? And do you feel like you're being fairly traded and being paid decent? And can you get a refill on my Diet Coke, please? It's not a conversation that you have with somebody. And how do you know what's happening behind the scenes? Sex trafficking, on the other hand, is pretty easy to at least register in our brain. It's forced prostitution, or anytime anybody under the age of 18 is involved in a commercial sex act. And so when we see prostitution or something that is related to that, it at least registers in our brain that something's not quite right here. Where maybe somebody who's working in a restaurant, we don't know what the situation is there. So with sex trafficking, it's a little easier to register that we need to maybe pay attention to it. Now, often we don't know what to do about it. We don't know exactly what to look for. We'll get into that in a little bit. Human trafficking involves some form of force, fraud, or coercion. So if you guys have ever seen the movie Taken, that's going to be force. Somebody's kidnapped, chained to a bed, and put into a brothel in a sex ring. Fraud is where maybe somebody thinks that they're getting a contract to model or a movie or something like that, and it ends up to be pornography instead. So they're brought in under one situation, and really the situation is something else. Coercion is what we see the majority of the time. Brainwashing, manipulation. Because we think, why would somebody be in a situation where they're selling themselves? What happens? And it's because of the grooming process. It's so slow, it's so sneaky, and you don't see what's going on when you're there, when you're involved in it, until it's too late. I think the best story that I can have to give you guys for coercion, the first human trafficking survivor I ever met, her dad was never in the picture, and when she was about 12 years old, her mom walked out. Didn't drop her off at social services, didn't check her in to school and say, hey, I'm not going to be here, just literally walked out. And so she stayed with a grandma for a week, an aunt for a week, stayed with a friend for a few days, and basically through middle school, she couch surfed. When you're supposed to be worrying about, do my friends like me, and are they my friends in first hour that they are in third hour, or whatever, she's worrying about where am I going to stay tonight. And she was so, she's an amazing individual, and she was able to do this for several years. She slipped through every crack in our safety nets that we have in society right now. Nobody noticed it. Grandma didn't say anything, aunts didn't say anything, friends didn't say anything. Nobody really helped her. They let her stay there for a little while, and then they say, basically, you've overstayed your welcome, move on out. During the middle school time, which if you gave me $1 million, I would not want to go back to being a middle school child. She didn't have anybody on her side. She didn't have an adult on her side saying, you know what, we'll get through this together. I believe in you. I'm on your side. We'll take care of this together. We're going to get through this together. Her adults in her life were saying, you've overstayed your welcome, move on. You've overstayed your welcome, move on. This is all she was really told in her mind. Until she was 15, and an older boyfriend stepped into her life and started telling her those things that we all need to hear. You're smart, you're beautiful, you're worthy, you deserve better than this. And as this person who'd been just passed around from couch to spare bedroom to couch to floor, whatever, she ate it up because somebody was caring for her, somebody was looking out for her, somebody was gonna protect her. And he started buying her things, and he groomed her. You deserve better, you need to get out of this little town. She was from Chippewa Falls. And pretty soon he had the great idea that you deserve better than this. Let's go up to the Twin Cities. And so when she was 15, she left Chippewa Falls, she dropped out of school, went up to the Twin Cities with him. And then these small conversations started the other way. You're such a pain in the butt. You're costing me so much money. You're a drag. You're no fun anymore. You need to earn some money. What are you gonna do? You've dropped out of school, you're worthless. You don't have a job, you're worthless. You need to get some money. Small conversations that were just dripping on her constantly. When she was back in Chippewa Falls, the conversations that were dripping on her are, you deserve better. I'll take care of you. And then it started the other way when he had separated her from the little bit of support network she had. And so we're gonna get evicted from our apartment. We need $300 and we need it now. Well, what are you gonna do for money? You're worthless. This is the conversation she's hearing all the time. Till he had the bright idea that he had a buddy who was willing to sleep with her and give him $300, and that would take care of all their problems. Now, nobody held a gun to her head. Nobody chained her to a bed. But I would say as at that time she was 16 years old, the first time she was pimped out. As a 16-year-old, did she have a choice in the matter? which is also why we have a different set of laws for juveniles than we do for adults. For juveniles, we don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. We just need to prove that it happened. It's really important to remember that human trafficking is a crime against a person. Human smuggling is a crime against a border. In our national conversation right now, when there's so much talk of immigration and border security and things like that, oftentimes these terms are getting confused. Who remembers the story? It was this summer. It's down in Texas, I believe San Antonio. There was a semi-trailer full of people. Half of them were dead, half of them were alive. And they were basically brought from either Mexico or Central America. And the national news is, human trafficking is happening in San Antonio. And they're yelling at it off of the news channels, and I'm yelling back at the TV just as much. It's like, it's always been happening in San Antonio. You're talking smuggling now. So the people in that situation were very vulnerable, and it's possible that they were going to be trafficked. But when they were brought over the border, they had paid somebody to do it. They were in on it. They were trying to get into this country. At that point, they were smuggled in. So it's really important that we remember the difference between smuggling and trafficking. Even though we say human trafficking, we think it involves movement. We've heard of cases where people have been trafficked all the way from their living room to the basement of their house. So you don't have to have movement with trafficking. So smuggling and trafficking are two different things, and we need to keep those separate. Human trafficking is the fastest growing crime on the planet right now. A lot of times I think it's growing so fast because we're talking about it, we're understanding what it is more, and the more that we are aware of something, the more that we're gonna name it. And so it's growing fast because of that. But I would also say it's growing fast because the laws are not keeping up with human trafficking. We have the same criminal element that 5-10 years ago were selling drugs, are now turned to selling people, because the economics of it are, if you're gonna sell drugs, you need to get them in, you need to divide them out, and you need to sell them. If you wanna expand your business, you need to bring more drugs in, you need to divide them out, you need to sell them. When you're talking about human trafficking, you bring a product in, which is a human, and you can sell it over and over and over again. 6, 8, 10 times a day, 7 days a week. And if you want to expand your business, you bring another person in. You bring another person in. And as you are moving around to avoid detection by law enforcement, you move a carload of product from Eau Claire to Hudson to Minneapolis. You get pulled over because your headlight's out. Well, officer, this is just me and my friends here, and we're heading up the road. If you got pulled over with a carload of meth or heroin, you guys are gonna find it out. You guys are gonna, see it. And the consequences are a lot harder for drugs. We're trying to get caught up with it, and we're doing a good job with legislation. But the economics are, a criminal can make more money selling people than they can selling drugs with less risk of getting caught. And so that's part of why it's expanding. Numbers-wise, it's hard to put a number on it. Some estimates tell us $150 billion worldwide. 46 million victims of human trafficking in the world. Now for me, when you start talking millions of people and millions of dollars, it gets a little, that's not my world. That's not my checkbook. It doesn't have commas, and certainly doesn't have a couple of commas in my checkbook. To put perspective for you, I want you guys to raise your hand if you know somebody in the last 2 or 3 years who's been affected by cancer. Either you personally or somebody you know and love. The World Health Organization tells us every year there's 14 million new cases of cancer every year. However, we have 46 million victims of human trafficking worldwide every year. So if we triple the number of cases of cancer, that's what we have for human trafficking. And those of you guys who were in the back saw how many hands went up, right? A large amount of us have been affected by cancer. If we triple that, that's what we have for human trafficking. But we're not talking about it. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children tells us every year that there's about 300,000 children who are sexually exploited in this country. And I would say that that number is very light, because we know with runaway children, within 48 hours of leaving home, 1/3 of them are under the control of a trafficker. Within 48 hours of leaving home, 1/3 of runaway children are under the control of a trafficker. And the national statistics for runaway are anywhere from like 1.6 to 2.1 million kids per year in the United States. So just off the runaways, we've got more than that number. The next line on here, I put this one up here, not because this is a typo, but this was really updated in 2005. This tells us how hard it is to get statistics on human trafficking. $9.8 billion was spent in the US on human trafficking in 2005. Now, that's not what organizations like mine got to fight human trafficking, or what we're giving to law enforcement, or what we're giving to direct services to provide shelter and helping people out of situations. We're talking $9.8 billion that Americans spent on buying other people 13 years ago. To put that number in perspective for you, $9.8 billion is more than we spend in the US on NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA combined. And who are we talking about for victims of human trafficking? 83% of them are US citizens. We're not talking about a truckload of Mexicans that got smuggled across the border. We are talking about the kid next door. And I say the kid because statistics tell us that the average age of entry into human trafficking is anywhere between 12 and 14 years of age in this country. So stop and think for a second. Somebody that you know who's 12, 13, or 14. Picture them and think of them being forced to have sex 10 times a day, 7 days a week with people they don't know, they don't want to be with, and they're afraid if they don't do what their trafficker told them to do, they're going to be beaten or threatened, or somebody that they know is going to be involved in what they're doing right now. This is what human trafficking looks like in our area now. This just kind of goes through our legal definitions. Again, it's by force, fraud, or coercion. And according to Wisconsin state statute, a commercial sex act is anything of value exchanged for sex. So it can be money, but it can also be drugs, alcohol, a place to stay. If we start thinking about it that way, we've got to include survival sex in there, and we've got a huge piece that we need to figure out what's going on. It is happening every day in our communities, I have no doubt. And I just want to touch on the coercion part. This is why it's so hard for us to get numbers. The coercion, the brainwashing. If you talk to a victim of human trafficking, they're not picking up the phone dialing 911. They are there because they're under coercion. They think that they have made these choices that's gotten them involved into this. And so they're not reaching out for help. And that's why for us and our organization, it's so important to empower people to understand what human trafficking is and what it looks like, so we as a society can be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for signs as somebody is getting groomed. Be on the lookout in our daily lives to see what's going on so we can get somebody the help that they need, because they are not asking for it themselves. They think that they've made a bad decision or a series of bad decisions that have gotten to them to a certain place. We figure about 1% of victims actually do what's called a victim outcry, where they're contacting either police or social services to get help. Now, if any of us went out to the parking lot and our cars were broken into, would any of us hesitate to call 911 and get a police report and turn it into insurance, and somebody's gonna pay because somebody wronged me, right? But when we do that, nobody asks us, well, why did you leave your car parked here? What did you do to deserve this? And some victim blaming. And this is changing in our conversations with human trafficking. But this is what traffickers have been telling their victims, that if you report this, you're gonna get put in jail. You're gonna be in trouble. Not me, you're the one that's doing it. And so they're afraid to speak out. This is basically, in a graphic design, the Wisconsin Human Trafficking Statute. And we are, as part of my job with the Director of Public Policy, I'm working on legislation every year. We were fortunate enough to get 4 pieces of legislation passed this year, which was amazing. But a couple of years ago, we made a huge change to this piece, and we're trying to stay on top of the traffickers. Criminals are smart. We're trying to make sure that the laws are getting close to being as smart as the criminals are. And so we were hearing a lot of times, well, I didn't know what they were doing. I was just giving them a ride to their date. I was giving them a ride to the hotel. I didn't know what they were doing inside there. Well, it doesn't just mean selling now. It means transporting. So if you're recruiting, you're enticing, you're harboring, you're transporting, you're providing, you're obtaining, you're, whatever, all this stuff. I didn't know what they were doing. I was just placing the ad online. If you're advertising, all this stuff, we're trying to stay on top of it. We're trying to constantly add to the statute so that whatever story we're hearing from the trafficker that's allowing them to slip through the cracks in our laws, we're trying to plug those cracks. We're trying to plug those holes, and we're trying to bust the people who are really doing the crime here. So if you're doing any of that stuff by force, fraud, or coercion for the means of debt, bondage, slavery, sex trade, etc., this is human trafficking. And even with the means, the middle part there, we're increasing that. So a couple of years ago, we added threatening to withhold an addictive substance. That's a hard one to say. Threatening to withhold an addictive substance. So not just that I talk somebody into it, but if I'm saying, if you don't do this, not just because I'm going to beat you up, but because I'm going to take away your heroin that you're addicted to. If I'm threatening to do that, that's a piece of force, fraud, or coercion. And so we're trying to constantly change this law to keep on top of where the traffickers are at. This is a map from, I believe, 2016 from the Polaris Project, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, of reported cases of human trafficking. Now, we know that not every case of human trafficking gets reported to a hotline, and everything that's reported into a hotline isn't a case of trafficking. But this gives us a little snapshot, because it's really hard to get data on human trafficking, because sometimes it's maybe reported as a sexual assault, sometimes it's reported as a prostitution offense, a child enticement. There's all kinds of different crimes that could be filed under. And so if I wanted to look up the number of people killed in Wisconsin, that's an easy one to sit down with, our best friend Google and look up. Human trafficking is harder. And so that's why we rely on the data from the Human Trafficking Hotline. I would like to just kind of point out that this just shows basically wherever there's people, there's trafficking. However, if we look at North Dakota here, where is there any North Dakota natives here? I'm sorry, I'm gonna rip on you guys. Where North Dakota, where there isn't anybody, there's some hot spots out there. Anybody have any ideas why there might be hot spots? Bingo. It's either a bunch of single men or a bunch of men who are acting single, who are out there for the week, maybe go back home during the week or weekend. But a lot of people out there with not a lot of things to do, and so traffickers will actually bring carloads of victims out there. I'll get into where people have been advertising in a little bit, which is kind of changing right now, but one of the big pages was Backpage website. There's been times, and Milwaukee has been known as the Harvard or the hub of human trafficking for the Midwest, which I think we can debate that a little bit too. But there's been times where Bismarck, North Dakota has had more ads on these websites than Milwaukee has. There's a little bit of a population difference, but yet there's hotspots out there. So this just goes to show that wherever there's people, there's trafficking. And to kind of go back to the point where we were talking about earlier, when we were going to have this presentation originally in January, because of the Super Bowl coming in, again, wherever there's large events, there's trafficking. I wouldn't say that football fans are big sex-crazed maniacs, and that's why there's a whole bunch of sex trafficking that happens, but it's that atmosphere, that party atmosphere. And more often than not, fans of football, or at least the ones who go to the Super Bowl, it's a lot of men. They have their weekend away. Boys will be boys. What happens in the Super Bowl stays in the Super Bowl, and it's that party atmosphere. And so traffickers will bring their victims to an area, and I think we'll probably cover some of that later as far as what we saw. in the Midwest when we had the Super Bowl here. But it's not Super Bowl. That's one event. We did training last year for the US Open that was down by Milwaukee because we knew that there was going to be 40,000 people a day coming to that little golf course, and we needed to be ready for it. In Eau Claire, we've got 5 music fests a summer there. We need to be ready for music fest weekends. We need to be ready for conventions. In Wisconsin, we need to be ready for deer hunting. Anytime there's a large gathering of people where they kind of put away their normal persona and they're on vacation or vacation mentality, that's when we can see an increase in trafficking. These are just some local, these are from our area, generally speaking. You know, each of these stories, they're people to me. A lot of them we know about. You know, and I have these up here because it shows a smattering. You know, there's Rhinelander. I think I've taken it off now, but there used to be one for Mercer, Wisconsin. If you guys have ever been to Mercer and you didn't blink when you went through there, you know, you saw the town, but if you blinked, you missed it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be Milwaukee or the Twin Cities. It's small towns. We're doing sting operations all the time. There was a Baldwin area veterinarian. I'm sure you guys heard about that story. The other thing that I'd like to point out is January 2015. When we think about victims of human trafficking, we automatically, in our minds, picture vulnerable people. When you're talking about exploitation, you have to widen what you're thinking of as vulnerable, because it's not just people who are housing insecure, who are maybe from a single parent household or something like that, like we normally think of as vulnerable individuals. 2015, there was a former Miss Wisconsin teen from Eau Claire who was almost trafficked to Europe. And to be in that pageant circle, you've got to have money. You've got to have involved parents, maybe overly involved parents, coming from an overly involved parent's perspective here, because you're traveling around a lot. You know, this isn't a cheap thing. Pageant life isn't cheap, and so you're not talking about somebody who's possibly homeless. This girl had pictures on her Facebook page and on her Twitter and Instagram accounts of her in her crowns and her sashes and her gowns, and somebody connected with her over social media. And how many of us who are on social media have people that we've friended or follow or whatever who we haven't met personally? We all do, right? She had one of those, and they connected with her and said, "Oh my gosh, you're beautiful. Have you ever thought about being a model?" "Why, yes, I have. As a matter of fact, that's what I've always dreamed of doing." And so he fed into her dream. And he fed into that vulnerability of having this dream that she wanted to do of being a model. He wasn't hitting on her because she needed food, shelter, and clothing. He was tackling her on, you have a dream, and I am the one person that can fulfill your dream. Now, she was about 18 or 19 when it happened, and her parents were there. They did Skype conversations with this guy who was over in Europe, and he's showing her pictures of, here's the house you can live in, and here's the car you can drive, and here's the contract from the agent and the photographer, and everything that they asked a question to, he had an answer for. And it was getting closer, and the mom was like, "Maybe I should come with you over there," which is what every 18 and 19-year-old wants to hear, is that you're going somewhere, and your mom's gonna tag along, right? So she was like, "No, Mom, I can do this myself." And right before she was ready to leave, because the mom just had this gut feeling something wasn't right, and he said, "Hey, we had another slot open up. You should have one of your friends come." Not, I saw a picture, and the person who's on that April 12th picture who's got the black sweater on, she fits the look of who we want. It was just bring a friend. And that's when the warning bells really went off for the mom. And so she contacted her brother, who is in national law enforcement outside of the area, and said, "Will you just run this guy's information? Something doesn't feel right about this. Here's the guy, here's what's happening," trying to get her to go over to Europe. This is where the story starts feeling like a made-for-TV movie, because she was literally hauling her suitcase out of her house, loading it up into her car to drive up to the Twin Cities to get in the airport. And her uncle calls her and says, "Don't do it, don't go. I've looked into this guy, and it's not good." "Oh, you're just trying to squash my dreams. My parents don't want me to grow up. They're having a problem with this." He's like, "No, I've looked into this guy. He's a known trafficker. And let me guess, you're gonna fly from the Twin Cities to Las Vegas. And then you're gonna transfer planes, right?" She's like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" Well, do you have your ticket? No, I'm going to get it when I get off there. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to go on to a private airplane, and they're going to give you all the food and drink you want, but it's drugged. And you're not going to know where you land. And you're not really going to Greece, where they say you're going. You're going to some Eastern European country, and you're never going to be heard from again. We've been following this guy, and we can't bust him because no one ever comes back. Now, if you got a call from your uncle that told you that, wouldn't you be like, okay, not going, thank you very much, you saved my backside? Not this 18-year-old in all of her wisdom. She said, come on, you're trying to squash my dreams. This is what I really want to do. This is the grooming process. This trafficker had groomed her so much over such a period of time, a couple of months, she was willing to not listen to her uncle, who is in law enforcement, but go fly across the world to meet a guy she had never met before because he had fed into her dream of being a model. That's the grooming process that happens. This is why people are not asking for help. And as I look through the paper on a daily basis, I mean, maybe not every single day, but certainly a couple of times a week, I am seeing story after story after story of either a sting operation, a situation that could have been charged as human trafficking, or something that was actually human trafficking. It is happening every day in our communities, but we're not seeing it right in front of us because we don't necessarily know what to look for. And it's happening over and over again. And what it comes down to, and this is a headline that was used for a sting operation a while ago, I mean several years ago, 2013 this one says, but this is unwanted business. None of us want this happening in our communities. None of us want this happening in our towns. But what do we do about it? This piece kind of talks about, promise we're not going into psychology 101 here, but this talks about the master manipulators that traffickers are. They will hit somebody wherever they're at. They can find a hole in whatever's going on in your world, and they will manipulate it. And so whether it is because you need food, shelter, clothing, or whether it's like the Miss Wisconsin teen who has a dream of something and is higher up there, they will figure it out and they will manipulate that person to know exactly how to get them to do whatever it is that they want to do. Because why would any of us sell ourselves for sex? It's nothing that we would think of, but yet it's the fastest growing crime in the world. It's happening all the time. So how does this happen? They're targeting the vulnerabilities. I was at a conference a few years ago, and there was a guy who was there. As part of his plea deal, he had to be on a panel with a bunch of advocates. He was a trafficker, and so he was answering questions. And somebody said, how do you know? How do you know? How can you figure it out? How can you find the hole that's in somebody's life and manipulate it? He said, it's easy. My target audience is middle school girls. Where do they all hang out? They hang out at a mall. And it's them and their 20 closest friends walking all in a group around the mall. I walk into them, literally bump right into them. And if I get somebody who looks me in the eye and goes, excuse you, I walk away because she's going to be tougher to crack. If I walk into somebody and they go, sorry, and stare at their feet, I know that I've got somebody I can possibly manipulate. So that's master manipulation that the traffickers do. And so whether it is isolating them and removing them from their safety net, like that trafficker did for the girl who was in Chippewa Falls and took her up to the Twin Cities, if she would have wanted to escape up there, who would she have talked to? She didn't know anybody. She felt like she was doing something wrong, so who's she gonna call? The police? In her mind, they were gonna arrest her. They're not safe for her because of all the stuff that the trafficker had filled her with. She was a vulnerable person. She didn't have any safety net around. The traffickers will manipulate somebody, get them thinking of sex as currency, isolate them, and manipulate them to do whatever they want to. So we need some warning signs. It'd be great if I could say, here's this little checklist of exactly what you need to look for. But with trafficking victims, there is no poster child. It can happen to any age, any race, any gender, any socioeconomic status. So we can't say that, oh, if you're an African-American female who's 15 years old and from a single-parent household of, X percentage of the poverty line, you're 50% more likely to become a victim of human trafficking. We can't do that because it happens to everybody. It could happen to everybody, I should say. It happens to boys, it happens to girls, men, women, old, young, there's no poster child. However, people want a checklist. So we try to come up with the best that we can do. What it really comes down to with people that you know is if there's a change. So you know your kids, you know your grandkids, you know your neighbors. And if all of a sudden they're starting to hang out with a new group of friends, they're looking different, they're changing how they're acting, maybe they're more boisterous, but they've always been withdrawn. Maybe they used to be boisterous and now all of a sudden they're shy. Something's not right there. That's a big warning sign. Now, it could also be that they're a moody teenager, that they're having some problems with mental health issues, that there's some, depression or something like that. Regardless of what we think it is, when we see changes, especially in adolescence, we need to butt in and help them. How you doing? What can I do? Something seems wrong. Do you need to talk about it? How are your friends? Different things like that. You don't just go, oh, well, something's wrong. I don't know what to do. We do something. We care about people. I'm giving you guys permission to be nosy neighbors again. Figure out the people in your life. When the kids are walking past, going home from school, be out there weeding your yard, raking your leaves, doing something. Be a presence in people's lives, whether it's volunteering. You guys are church members, you're active church people. I'm sure you're all connected with people in your life, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But sometimes I think we're afraid to say, wow, something seems off with that neighbor. I'm not gonna butt in. No. What's going on? Are you doing okay? Now, you don't have to be like, excuse me, are you falling victim to human trafficking? And can I call the human trafficking hotline number? What are you doing? You need to talk? Something seems off. You doing okay? Just be a person again. Sometimes I think we need permission to get out of our little screens, our four walls, or whatever. So whether it's that they have a new group of friends, there's changes in clothing, changes in attitude, changes in physical appearance, that's an obvious one. A big red flag for human trafficking is an older boyfriend or girlfriend. So maybe it's a 27-year-old dating a 15-year-old. Now those of us who are adults go, whoa, something's not right. But the 15-year-old goes, hey, that's cool. They've got money. They've got a car. They'll take me wherever. They're treating me, I'm that person at school now. I've got the older boyfriend. I've got the older girlfriend. And so when you see that, you just, you have a conversation. You don't have an accusatory conversation. You don't do a lecture. You have a conversation. And we figure it out. The third one on there, a barcode or name tattoo. I really need to delve into that a little bit because we can't just say because they have a tattoo, they're a human trafficking victim. Because everybody's got tattoos now. Grandma's got a tattoo even sometimes. But oftentimes we will see that traffickers brand their victims and will put a certain tattoo on a group of people that shows possession, that shows monetary sense, that shows maybe a barcode. And nothing says I'm a piece of merchandise more than having a barcode tattooed to you. So keep that in perspective. Disappearing for a few days without explanation, not in control of personal documents. That's not just for foreign nationals. It's also for any people. How easily would it be for any of us to start our lives over again if we didn't have access to our driver's license, our social security number, a birth certificate? Could we even get a rental anywhere? Could we get a lease on an apartment? So they take those things away so that they control that person. And won't talk unless a third party is present. We see that often in the medical industry. Somebody goes to a hospital, an emergency room, they just got in an accident, and they're not willing to say anything until that controlling third party is there. If they're not allowed to talk, that's a huge red flag. And so keep that in mind. So policy work. I will go through this pretty quickly because we've had some really big wins on this recently. This is a map from Shared Hope International. They study the law every single year and they grade our states on how they are doing. They show about 110 different points of law. And as you can see, and this is what I love about public policy, and I'm like one of these geeky nerd people. When we first started in 2011 with this, everything was black. The darker the color, the worse the laws were. As we started looking into it, as awareness increased, as we had something to work for, the colors started getting lighter. This is what 2017 looks like. And so all of the states are making some pretty big progress on there. One thing that has been huge in the last few weeks, I see a couple people nodding, like you should have seen me doing cartwheels in my house when I saw this happen. Okay, so everybody's got homework. I want you guys to watch the movie I Am Jane Doe. It's on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. It's the case against Backpage. Backpage was a website, is a website, I don't know what we can necessarily call. This is what Backpage looks like right now. It's been seized by the FBI. Why we are not seeing human trafficking happening is because most often the ads are online. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you had to stand on a corner to get, meet up with somebody who was willing to buy you. Now you place an ad online. However, one of the biggest, it was known as like the online brothel. Backpage is a lot like Craigslist, where you could sell clothing, you could sell houses, you could sell craft supplies, but they also had a personal section. A year ago, they had an adult entertainment section. That got switched to being personals. But it was still very obvious that, like grandma says, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, the personals ads were basically their online entertainment section. With the movie I Am Jane Doe talks about everybody's ability to try and shut down this website. They are making millions of dollars, 40 or 50 millions of dollars a year. And the only place that they were charging for on the ads was their personal section. So you could sell $1 million house on Backpage, it wouldn't cost you a dime. You wanted to sell somebody for a half hour, it cost you money. And so their entire business model was made up of people selling people, which is the problem that a lot of us had with it. If you're making money off of selling people, you're a secondary pimp in my mind. So it wasn't Friday, it was last Friday, the FBI seized Backpage. Shortly before that happened, we had a bill passed in Congress called SESTA or FOSTA, depending on which house it was in, the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. So this was set up so that people who had been victims of sex trafficking could sue Backpage for damages. This was civil. So I could, if I was saying something bad about somebody on Facebook, they can sue me, but they can't sue Facebook. And that's still fine because Facebook didn't know what was going on. However, these ads were being set up. Backpage was approving them. Backpage was getting money for them. You're no longer an innocent third party. But yet they were still being able to squeak through this loophole in the federal law. This was passed, and this is Craigslist took down their personal section. So it was such a huge win. Now, I'm not under any disillusion that, human trafficking is gonna go away. It's either gonna be driven even more underground, which is gonna make it harder for law enforcement to find it, or maybe it's gonna come out in the open air and we're all gonna start seeing it for what it is. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what's happening with that, but it's been a change and we're happy about it at least. We've done a lot of work down in Madison. Like I said, we got 4 bills passed this year. It's been great, and what we're trying to do is give law enforcement the tools to help them do their jobs better. So one of the bills that we got passed this year was that if somebody asks a minor for an illicit photo, we had to wait until that person received the illicit photo from a minor before it was illegal. Now, simply asking a minor for a naked photo of themselves is a crime. And so we're trying to help out law enforcement as best we can. And I have the pleasure of introducing my intern, Noah Hansen, and he is going to talk about some programming that we do. So excuse us while we switch.
Okay. One sec, guys. Just got to get this hooked on. I just put it in my pocket. There we go. All right, so for programming, one of the things we do is called reducing your slavery footprint. And so what that goes on is labor trafficking. So we've been talking a lot about sex trafficking, and our organization was like, there's more to human trafficking than just sex trafficking, so we want to get into the labor portion of it. And labor trafficking can happen, mostly in America, in restaurants, farms, or in private homes. There have been reports of 5,400 labor trafficking cases inside the United States in 2007. But what we've been doing more of is talking about international labor trafficking. So labor trafficking internationally and in the US can happen through debt bondage, forced fraud, and coercion. And for debt bondage, that means that someone, let's say in the coffee industry is where we've seen it a lot, is they buy into the industry and they get so far in debt that they just can't get out, and they're not making any money off of it, or they're making just enough money to get by, and it's a type of, I believe, human trafficking. And then we see it in the gold industry where people are promised, this isn't debt bondage, but they're promised that they're promised that when they help mine the gold, they're gonna get a piece of whatever profits they make, and they end up not making any money, and they go through horrid conditions, and they make nothing. We see it in the chocolate industry, where kids are brought in from different regions in Africa into the Ivory Coast, and they're forced to climb trees to get cocoa beans. They're forced to cut cocoa beans with large machetes, and it's just a really terrible situation for them to be in. And there are 14 to 24 million labor trafficking cases worldwide. Now, the nice thing about labor trafficking is there's a lot of organizations that are doing things to end it. So we have Fair Trade Certified, which gives fair prices for farmers and decent working and living conditions for workers, direct trade with farmers, and sustainable agricultural practices. And then we have Rainforest Alliance, which adheres to the policies of international labor organizations, especially concerning child and forced labor and the rights to collective bargaining. We also have Equal Exchange. Equal Exchange cuts out the middleman and pays farmers a living wage. So each one of these are labels that you can find on the back of, say, a candy bar or your chocolate. It's really easy to spot. You just have to look at the back. Sometimes it's on the front, and that's how you know that there's a third party looking in and making sure that there's not human trafficking involved in the thing you're buying. You can also look at looking for companies that work directly with their suppliers, and what that means is that they're checking in and making sure that there's no human trafficking going on from what you're buying. So here's some ways that you can stop buying products that have that are involved with human trafficking. You can be a conscious consumer. So being a conscious consumer means you're going to research that product before you buy it. It's really important because that's how you know that there's no human trafficking involved in it. It's really easy to do. You can use things like the apps we have here, Sweat and Toil, Good on You, and Good Guide. If you go on the Fierce Freedom Facebook page, they're all posted on there. We have some helpful steps that'll let you get that human trafficking out of what you're buying. And that's the other thing, is you look for the certifications I mentioned easier. Again, they're really easy to find. Use your purchasing power. Now, when you use your purchasing power, that means that you're voting with your dollar. Stop buying from companies you know have a hand in labor trafficking. And spread the word. We post a lot of things on Facebook, on our Fierce Freedom Facebook page, so make sure to share those, or if you find an article when you're researching products, you can share that as well. And some other stuff we do is we talk. We talk. You saw Jody talk forever on just amazing, just an amazing job. Not forever, sorry. She's in charge of my grades. We talk in schools, she talks to churches, and she talks, we present movies. And also we have this thing called the Be Aware campaign. Now the Be Aware campaign is when Jody works with hotels, and she teaches the workers at the hotels how to spot the signs for human trafficking. And then we have a brief video. Do we know about the sound? Should we just skip it? Okay, do it? Okay, listen carefully, guys. The statistics on this are a couple years old, so keep that in mind while watching it. Up. Do I just press space? Okay. Should we exit it real quick? Sorry, technical difficulties. Let's go there.
Oh yeah, we can crank this up. There we go.
What if I told you there are 27 million slaves worldwide? How would you respond if I told you there are more slaves now than when Lincoln was alive? Now, they're not all black, and they're usually not men. They're mothers and sisters and little children. They're not used for picking cotton or someone else's maid. They just make up what is known as the human sex trade. For $5 in Africa, you can have a girl for the night. Do with her what you please. She won't put up a fight because she knows if she does, it'll be her last night alive. In Japan, child pornography is legal. This dirty hobby some men have is considered regal. Wouldn't you believe? Don't be so naive. It's not just overseas. It's happening in our own backyard, too. But we're going about it all wrong, not arresting the Johns, but the Does, not prosecuting the pimps, but the so-called hoes. Hi, I'm Sally. I'm 16 years old. It was 2 years ago. I was taken from my home, kidnapped by a boy that I thought loved me, but boy, was I wrong. I ended up in the brothel servicing the Johns. I wanted to escape, but believe me, I couldn't. There were physical constraints and emotional ones too. You think after what I did every night, I could see myself as one of you? Tarnished by the undeserving title of prostitute, victim to my pimp, and now your opinions too? You think I chose my profession? I was stricken of my innocence, ripped of my virginity, and sold into hell, unable to stop the hate. Oops, I meant rape, night after night. Hi, I'm Gina. I just turned 18. Constant fights with my parents caused me to leave my home, where I thought I could make it out on my own, and for a while, I did. And from the world, I hid until I fell into the wrong group of friends. Little did I know that that would be my end. I can't deny that at first I chose prostitution. I admit the road was high and it might have been time for me to go back home, but I thought that once I was in, I could get out. I made the mistake of believing that I was in charge of my body, not somebody else. You see, 20 guys a night sure wasn't my decision. My pimp's hands on my neck, tears blurring my vision as he told me I wasn't my own person anymore. I was his possession, his girl, his whore. It wasn't survival of the fittest or even survival of the prettiest. It was survival of who would put out the most and not fight back. The drugs we were on made it easy to comply. We grew so delusional, we didn't see another side. We thought there was no way out, and if there was, we weren't worth it. Hi, I'm insert the name of your mother, best friend, or sister, because it's a possibility that any one of them could be another. You see, these monsters have no criteria or method to their ways. They'll take young, white, Asian, black, Hispanic, make anyone their slave. Now, sex was never meant as an item to be sold, and these girls' lives were never meant to be taken from them and withheld. And the lies that they hear that they're not worth it were never meant to be told. Now, I know it's a sad thought, but what is done is done. What only matters now is that you are aware and how you choose to respond, because every 26 seconds, another child is sold. What will you do now that you've been told?
Yeah.
Let's give Jody and Noah a hand, please. We have a second presentation once we get it loaded up here about rehabilitation.
Steve, is it possible that I just use a regular mic?
Is that okay? I don't know how to turn this off.
I'll take that. Thank you.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Perfect.
Our second speaker who will address regional efforts to rehabilitate trafficking victims is Katie Ryan. Katie is Sexual Assault Services Director for Domestic and Sexual Violence at Turning Point in River Falls. I've learned an awful lot from Katie. I started with Kathy, and she sent me to Katie, and I learned a ton about things. So we're going to be really informed. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, everybody. As Steve said, I'm Katie Ryan. I'm going to talk a little bit about Turning Point first and our services, and talk about why, as a domestic violence and sexual assault agency, that we serve human trafficking victims. Our mission statement is to provide support and resources to achieve freedom from domestic and sexual violence. We share a similar mission as Jody, and that's to work ourselves out of a job, really is what we're going for. An overview of Turning Point as an agency: we began in 1978 as a domestic violence research project, and our shelter opened in 1980. Our current shelter was built in 1989, and I will show you some pictures of our spaces that we have that people utilize. We began receiving separate sexual assault victim services funding in 1995, so that's when my program was officially created. I've been at Turning Point for the past 8 years, about in May. It's hard to believe that it's almost May. It's crazy. But I've been doing sexual assault services for the past 5 years now. We have 5 service programs and second chances. So our 5 programs that we currently have is a sexual assault program that I'm the director of. We have a legal services program, a volunteer services program, a domestic violence services program, and then our shelter services program. A lot of times when people hear Turning Point, you think of the shelter that we have that's located in River Falls, right? But our main goal as advocates is to try to do safety planning and get people in touch with options and resources that they never have to utilize shelter. That's the ultimate goal, to help people stay in their homes but safely. So to help provide options or get them to other safe housing options, things along those lines. And the majority of our people actually are receiving our other outreach services versus receiving our shelter services. And we provide services to men, women, and children. That's when I say when we serve all victims of domestic and sexual violence. It's something that, like human trafficking, it spans across all socioeconomic statuses, all races, genders, all sexual orientations. And so we have to have services available to everybody that wants to access them. Here are some of the spaces that we have. Let's use the laser pointer here. Up here is we have support group for victims of sexual assault on the first and third Wednesdays of each month from 6:30 to 7:30. And then on Thursdays, we have a domestic violence support group and also a children's support group that happens at the same time. And this is the room that we host our group in. It's on our 3rd level of our Second Chances thrift store. This is our kids' room that we have at our shelter, so people are able to come in here and play with the toys that you see. We have a DVD player. We also have a Wii and things like that for the kiddos to use. And these are some of our pictures that we have in the shelter. So we have a family room, and then in the backyard we have our play set. Our shelter consists of a main communal level. It has a kitchen, living room, the playroom like I showed you, and then we have 7 bedrooms currently where we have families and single people that come and stay with us. Here is our Second Chances thrift store on Main Street in River Falls. It is primarily ran by volunteers, so if anybody is interested, I know Kelly is always looking for them. It's my little Second Chances plug for her. And then I think it was just this past fall actually, we opened our St. Croix County Outreach Office, which is listed up here, and that is at 337 East 5th Street by the center. And that office is open Tuesday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's walk-in. People don't need an appointment to come and utilize those services. They can just show up, and there's always somebody there during those office hours. A little more information about the services that we have available. Our 24-hour crisis line and text hotline. We have somebody available to talk to somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't matter if it's a holiday or if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We have a paid, trained staff to answer that crisis line. All of our staff from part-time to full-time have at least 40 hours of training, and we go to regional and international trainings. I was just lucky to go to the EVAWI, the End Violence Against Women Conference in Chicago. It was really fabulous. So our emergency shelter, which I talked a little bit about, we have 24 beds available, and that's not counting pack and plays and kids cots that we have. We have support groups, which I talked about, later life abuse, personal advocacy, which ranges, will assist people from helping with resumes to setting up emails, faxing, giving shampoo and conditioner, things along those lines. Information and referrals, we have a list of resources available in Pierce and St. Croix counties, and a few for beyond that to get people hooked up with where they need to go, because that's a big job that we have as advocates, is to present options for people so that they can choose what's going to be best for them in their situation. Crisis counseling, so we have one-on-one emotional support that we provide, whether it's over the phone, text hotline, or whether it's somebody that wants to make an appointment with us and sit down and have a one-on-one. I've talked with people about for an hour, just talking, just letting everything out, because domestic and sexual violence really does spread into all aspects of people's lives. And so whether it's more structured or whether it's getting support in that way. Community education, like we're doing right now. Legal advocacy, the meat and potatoes of the legal advocacy program is restraining order assistance. We also help with criminal and other civil court cases. Emergency transportation, we provide if somebody needs to go to the hospital or go to court or come to shelter, we provide transportation for that. Our Home Start program, when somebody comes into shelter and they're leaving to go to their new safe home, they can actually go to Second Chances, and we have items available for them to furnish their new place, just to help, again, with that additional barrier. And that also comes in handy too if people need clothing or if they need other things like that. We also use our Second Chances thrift store for that as well. And then our wellness program, that's going to be restarting up again at the end of May, and that's just offering people more opportunities to explore different kinds of wellness, like trauma yoga and things along those lines. So we want to have that available for people to access. So my sexual assault program consists of a couple of different groups. I work with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. I work with sexual violence within an intimate partner relationship. There is still a lot of stigma associated with that, a lot of stereotypes. People think that if you're in a committed relationship that you have certain obligations to your partner, and you don't. So a lot of people don't consider that as sexual assault or rape. So that's why we do community education and things like that, to talk to people about that, but also be available to help them throughout the systems and option explorations in that category. Stranger or acquaintance rape, we know that most often somebody who is sexually assaulted by somebody that they know. It's not because of what they wore or how much they had to drink. It's because somebody saw somebody in a vulnerable situation and chose to exert their power and control over that person. And then human trafficking, which brings us to what we're going to be talking more about tonight. So with human trafficking victims, as Jody was talking about, I'm going to probably refer to a couple of things that you have already touched base on, which is perfect because it just reinforces. But I often come in contact with human trafficking victims within systems. So I do outreach within the St. Croix County and the Pierce County Jail. So certain conversations may come up while we're talking about victimizations and doing group in there where I'm like, oh, that's a connection right there. Or receiving referrals from law enforcement or from other agencies where it looks like a intimate partner violence situation or domestic violence situation, because like Jody was talking about, it looks more like coercion. It's a lot easier to control somebody if you have that established relationship with them. They have that dependency over them, and they believe that you have a care for them, that you're taking care of them. So that often when it looks like that, because we are Turning Point for Victims of Domestic and Sexual Violence, we'll get that referral to us. And they're not self-identifying as victims of human trafficking. Like I said, a lot of the time it's the things that they're saying. They're not having control over their identification. They're not really knowing the area or certain things that they say that comes up in the conversation. I'll be able to make those connections, but they're not necessarily identifying it as themselves. Because like we were talking about, they're not going to. They feel like they have a hand, that they have a choice in the things that they're doing. And if you feel that way, you're not going to identify as being a victim. So why does Turning Point serve victims of human trafficking? Oftentimes, domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking occur concurrently. So just like I was just talking about, that domestic violence relationship, that their intimate partner also pimping them out to maybe their friend or trading them to drugs or those things, those are happening all at the same time. And then survivors may have experienced different types of victimizations at different times. A person who is sexually assaulted as a child is going to be more likely for a recruiter to notice them, pick them out, and then traffic them in. They're going to be easier for that coercion piece because they have that history. And then domestic violence might be a contributing factor for trafficking. Like I said, in the past couple of minutes, we just talked a lot about that establishing relationship and that coercion. And then there's similar power and control dynamics. If anybody has seen the power and control wheel, there's certain things that are on there that the Domestic Abuse Project in Duluth has made. Things like manipulation, financial control, isolation. All of those things play a part in maintaining control, and that's also what traffickers use, and even more so with the branding and the more trauma over and over and over again. And then survivors need similar services. It's that safe housing, meeting those basic needs, helping establish with job history, getting resumes and things done. If people are getting recruited into the life at 13 or 14 years old, they're not going to necessarily have the skills to be able to then go out and get a job when they're 18, 19, maybe when they found a chance to leave the life or escape. So we're there to assist them with that. And then the ultimate tragedy is not the brutality of the bad people, but the silence of the good people. I always like to end with that quote, because that's really how change occurs, is having those conversations, getting involved in that, and that's how we're going to change their culture. That completes my part of the presentation.
If you receive a report of a suspected trafficking situation, what is the scenario of reaction by who are the proper authorities, and what would be a typical scenario what takes place?
It would be your local law enforcement. So if it was in the city of Hudson, obviously you would contact the city of Hudson Police Department. If it's out in the county, the sheriff's office would respond. This is kind of a new type of investigation for law enforcement in this area. Not that it hasn't been going on for a long time. We're aware that it's going on. It really comes down to the resources that we have available. So you may have heard about the week before the Super Bowl, we did have an operation, a couple of different operations going in the county, and those were definitely multi-jurisdictional. It was the Sheriff's Office, Hudson Police Department, the Richmond Police Department, and River Falls Police Department, all working in conjunction with DCI, the Division of Criminal Investigations, a state police agency. You can hear about Minnesota BCA on the Minnesota side. That would be the Wisconsin counterpart to that. So I think law enforcement has recognized that there is no agency in St. Croix County that can handle these investigations alone. So we are working towards training our officers and then working together, because we know we can't work these cases individually, and with the ability to travel, whether it's the pimps or the people being trafficked, they move, and they move across state lines, across all jurisdictions. So we're really in the infancy stage, and that's kind of sobering because there's a lot of energy, a lot of people that are interested, and certainly within the law enforcement community too, but it really is coming down to resources for us.
And I just want to tag on to that a little bit. As part of the Human Trafficking Task Force of Wisconsin, and that was for 2 years, it ended in December, and the Attorney General Brad Schimmel was a co-chair of that. Through that, he set up a human trafficking bureau within DCI. And so there's 6 agents based around the state that are able to kind of take some of the things that you guys are seeing on a local level, and because Hudson Police is going to investigate what happens in Hudson. Well, we know that human trafficking, those cases cross jurisdictions all the time, and so having this Human Trafficking Bureau in DCI is able to bridge that gap between the different jurisdictions. The downside of it is the agent that we've got in Eau Claire covers 23 counties. So we still don't have a lot of resources, but it is getting better, and as part of that, they've also set up in Department of Justice a human trafficking school where they are educating law enforcement and doing some like continuing ed credits, things like that. And so we're definitely getting the people who are coming out of police academy trained as they're in school, but also getting some of the more seasoned people trained on an ongoing basis as well. And so Department of Justice has really done a good job of figuring out that they've got holes that they need to plug and working on that too. So, but yeah, it is a tough thing to do.
Hi, my question is for the first guest speaker. I'm sorry, I didn't remember your name.
Jody.
Jody. Hi, Jody. I'm not sure if I understand what I heard correctly, so correct me if I didn't. But I believe you said 83% of people who are trafficked are from the U.S.?
In the United States, 83% of our victims are U.S. citizens.
Okay.
And so oftentimes people are assuming that trafficking victims in the United States are going to be foreign nationals.
Right.
But they're U.S. victims.
Okay. So, and then you also said that, I believe you said, the majority of them are between 12, 13, and 14. So if that's true, my question is that just because they're the most vulnerable age, or is it because of the link to social media? I know you referenced, somebody going to the mall and running into them, but I'm just wondering, is it just age-related vulnerability, or is there more to it? And in addition to that, when I saw some of the points that you put up here, you talked about the criminal act at the age of 18, under the age of 18, and I'm wondering why that, if they're being victimized at 12, 13, 14, does the laws change at 18? And
so the average age of entry into human trafficking is between 12 and 14. Usually the first time that they are intersecting with law enforcement or social services is more around 16 or 17. But to answer your question, the reason why it's so young is because they're vulnerable, they're gullible. You think about what somebody who's in that age bracket, what they're looking, they don't see the consequences of actions. And so if somebody walked up to you, started a conversation with you and said, hey, I've got a new iPhone for you, all of us in this room would be like, well, what's the catch? A 14-year-old is going to say, sweet, I just had a fight with my mom because she wasn't willing to give me the new iPhone. I'll take it from this person, not thinking, what is my consequence or what is my true cost of this? And so that age is more vulnerable because they don't have the full brain development. They're not thinking consequences. They're thinking immediate gratification. They're also looking for love and acceptance immediately as well.
And maybe I didn't phrase that question right, because how are they being reached? You mentioned something about them going to the mall.
Yep.
Sorry. You mentioned about going to the mall, and I just see the social media part of it. So I'm just wondering, is it, how are they reaching those?
Right. So what we're seeing a lot of times is that somebody will meet somebody originally in person, but then really develop that relationship online. So through social media, through texting, through something like that. And so they meet face to face. So I've met a lot of you guys tonight, at least, where if somebody sent me a Facebook request tonight, I'd be like, oh yeah, I think I met them tonight, accept that. And then you start this conversation. So the meeting is face to face, but the grooming happens online. And the grooming process is oftentimes several months long. So it's not just this quick, I met you this weekend and this happened. It's a months long process. And these traffickers are willing to put in the time and energy because oftentimes they're making $200,000, $300,000 per victim per year. And so to put in that time is worth it to them to get that person fully groomed so that they've bought into the situation. Because if we think of just a kidnapping situation where you're constrained physically, as soon as they have the option of running, they're gonna run. But if they're emotionally bonded to that person, emotionally bought into that situation, they're not gonna run it the first chance they physically get. Because I owe you something. I love you. You treat me better. It's a bad relationship. And sometimes these people, because they do start out so young, they don't understand what a true healthy relationship is, too. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
This is not really a question, it's a comment. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's an excellent book on the subject written by Jerry Rice, a Harvard attorney who's retired in Prescott. The book's name is Ravens Revenging. And Jerry has an extended family member who was caught up in this. And the book is extraordinarily entertaining. It takes place in northwestern Minnesota. And it really deals with the frustration of an uncle in regards to his niece who was caught up in this and lost her life in the process. And because of the lack of resources, he takes the law in his own hands. It reads like a John Grisham novel, and I could hardly put the book down when I got it. So I just put it out there for your interest. Raven Revenging by Jerry Rice.
And is that a fiction or a nonfiction book?
It's a fiction, but it takes in the whole concept of what you've been talking about.
Got it. Thank you.
I have a question for Matt. Matt, can you tell us something about what's happening right here in Hudson? Is that casting light you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, basically, I mean, we echo similar. They're fighting in Eau Claire, and it comes in a number of ways, and that's really how we organize. We started a couple years ago, just kind of asking questions because we were encountering people in our church and things that were caught up in this, again, completely unawares. There was a young middle school girl that was being groomed at the time, and the parents didn't even realize that until almost it was time for her to be released. And so that came to our attention because they were just in our church, and we had encountered others as well that had kind of come out of that. And so we were just kind of floored, just early on that it was happening in our community. And we asked questions and just started asking how we can come and help along with this, with different agencies in the community, and really, I think everyone has a different view of how they encounter that, and it doesn't necessarily fit a pattern, but it does exactly what Jody has said. It hits everyone, and it's here in Hudson, and it.
Matt, can you say, without divulging anything confidential, can you use the word we? Who is the we? Did some friend say? Young girlfriend or something say something about her friend was being groomed, and then to a pastor or to adult? What was the mechanics of that?
I'm not going to divulge anything with that, except for the fact that you have everything from, you have high school age people that are doing it to friends in high school, so they're coercing their friends and selling their friends to other peers. You have peer related, you have these older boyfriend types, you have friends of the family. It really goes across all those borders, and that's kind of the difficult thing. I think a lot of times we think of it, in some of these other ways, maybe in more of Hollywood ways, but I think Jody did a great job of kind of describing everything she said is exactly what we're seeing here in Hudson. So everything she spoke about is the thing that we have found here, which is what prompted Casting Light. So we kind of, and we've worked with them. We have an advocate right now that is a survivor that is available for to be there to counsel and to be a resource for this community. And the phone number to our local number for that, to get a hold of her and things too. She's was also involved with Fierce Freedom, and so really it's the same. We do not. In fact, we have a lot of risk factors in Hudson, I believe, that make us even more vulnerable than I think we think. I mean, particularly with the Highway 94, with the big truck stop that we have here, with our proximity to the Twin Cities, being over the border, away from some of the Minneapolis Police Department jurisdiction. We have all the risk factors of the Twin Cities and this area, which has been the top 13. FBI is identified as one of the top 13 worst cities in the nation right now for trafficking, and we're right here. We're part of the Twin Cities. So for us to think that, and I think one of our first coalition meetings, and we had another one recently too, where we were continuing to identify kind of what is next for us, and working together with the partners of this group. And really a lot of it is around helping this community understand that it is happening here, because what we're discovering across the agencies and organizations here is that it's very difficult to work when we don't even understand that it is an issue. And so that is one of the things that across the board all of our groups continually say we need to really help Hudson understand. And so even just by your being here tonight is a really great way to do that.
One of the things that we always say is to use your sphere of influence. When I found out about human trafficking, granted, I was looking for another project to do, so I didn't have to talk to my husband on a daily basis. But the big piece of it is that we don't have to all change our lives. You don't have to quit your job and go work full-time at an anti-trafficking agency. Go home, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, share with your coworkers what's going on. Figure out within your job how you can be on the lookout for human trafficking. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you work at a hotel. Maybe you work at a gas station. However it is, use your sphere of influence, because if we're all looking for something that nobody's talking about, pretty soon we all start talking about it. And I think of the signs that we see as we're going to the airport. If you see something, say something. It's not just about Homeland Security. It's about all of our issues that we're seeing. If you see something, say something. Contact law enforcement. Reach out to somebody who you think can help. Now, sometimes we need organizations like yours to identify which are the key points in a community to connect with, but we all can connect with somebody in our lives.
Going off of what Matt said, and I don't know anything logistical in Hudson, but it's just, I know sex trafficking is happening a lot in hotels, and Hudson has a ton of hotels, and there's even newer ones being built. Just as a smaller community, and I know we have the Twin Cities, is that to me is a little red flag, but I don't know why Hudson has so many hotels and motels and being so close to the Twin City and being number 14 on it.
I don't think it's a red flag that there's hotels, that there's a large amount of hotels. I think it all depends on what's happening in those hotels and how hotels are looking for it. When I talked about how we've changed the human trafficking statute, one of the things that we added in there 2 years ago is that you've known or reasonably should have known that proceeds that you're getting came from a prostitution, you're just as guilty as if you were selling the person. And so using that, well, I didn't know where the money came from and I'm running a hotel, we're not buying it anymore as a state. So these hotels that were set up as a hotel, but they're really a brothel, we're working on shutting them down as a state, and we've got the laws on the books now to do it.
It is true that a lot of it happens at a hotel, and that's the thing. A lot of the hotels now, and I think most of them in Hudson, do sign on to a code of conduct that they subscribe to nationally, that they have to go through a certain amount of training as staff. I think across the river, they're a little ahead of the game, and you may have been reading in some of the articles like in Woodbury and things. The hotels were kind of the first round of defense that identified those things, and we haven't quite got to that level. And so one of the things we've done this year, one of the big Casting Light initiatives, was to try to get some of that for our hotels. And so we started with the Super Bowl, using that as kind of a reason to get in and to do some training that way. But the hotels can be allies in that, because they are one of the ones that sees some of these identifying signs right out of the gate. And we've been seeing a lot of articles out of the Twin Cities, of some of that happening.
And I also can tell you that these operations are getting a little more smarter because I think the laws are getting tougher on the hotels and the education. It's being reported. They're looking at renting apartments a month at a time, so they'll continue to move, whether it's city to city or within the same city. But there's a portion of these folks that won't do a transaction unless it's in a residence. So it's not just the hotels. It's happening in the neighborhoods as well.
I'm wondering if anything's being done to educate the youth, middle school and high school, about the grooming process and when you're being groomed and so that they're more aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Turning Point does education in the majority of the schools in Pierce and St. Clair counties. And that's why I kind of wanted to add on to the question that we were talking about before, is that violence is a process. So we didn't just get to the point where buying people is okay. There are those microaggressions that we can all change in our daily lives. You know, talking about the boys will be boys mentality, those types of things, the excusing those types of behaviors, the catcalling or the objectifying people or talking about people in certain ways. I mean, breaking down all of those things, it really makes it okay for the more aggressive things, the buying people, the sexual assault, you know, all of those things, it really escalates. So we go around and we talk about that, because talking about consent and body safety and all of those things really are the starting point for those to prevent that type of victimization and to really start the cultural change. It's starting with the youth and talking about those topics with them.
And I think to consider having not the talk, but a series of talks, and use teachable moments with kids. And they can be 4 years old and you see a commercial on TV of somebody in a bikini selling a hamburger. You don't have to have a 20-minute sit-down conversation with a 4-year-old about why this is inappropriate. You can say, gosh, what does that have to do with a hamburger? And that's it. And it's a teachable moment. And it's about instilling our values as adults in our children on a regular, consistent basis to stop that hypersexualization, to stop that violence, to, you know, how many of our conversations this year have been about Me Too and situations around that? Our society is changing. We are starting to address sexual violence and harassment issues, and I think it's great, and I think it's needs to continue. I know we do a lot of training in schools, in the juvenile detention center, things like that. I'm sure you guys are doing it on a regular basis too, or would like more volunteers to help you out with it.
And one of the things that it says is that right now the response time to a call reporting human trafficking from the Hudson truck stop is approximately 1 week. Is that right?
That's changing, and that has to do with the national hotline. So if you call them the national, so right now, you know, calling local law enforcement, that's not the case. But if they call the national hotline, which they do have posted there and things, yes, that the response time's that long. That was one of the things that prompted, you know, the organization of the coalition is to draw it, because even at the time, the truck stop there's a restaurant there, there's the chapel and things like that. So the chapel would find, they would maybe have a girl there that they found in the parking lot that has come for help, and then there would be no communication between, even though it was 20 feet away to the actual truck stop business, there would be no communication there. And so that was, those kinds of things were coming out of our conversations with, which is what kind of prompted our drawing these groups together into a coalition, is so we can talk together about it, have a response, a system, understand who to call when and all that kind of thing. That's really the defining, you know, experience of Casting Light, why we came together. But so yes, if that national hotline, it's improving, and now we're working to have a communication channel so that they're not necessarily knowing that that's who to call and that kind of thing. But that's definitely how it's been.
we always say that if you're in an area where you're from, contact local law enforcement. If you're outside of your area, that's when you should use the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. But if you know what the police are like, what the law enforcement is like, contact local law enforcement. And you guys have great local law enforcement up here, so I would just non-emergency or 911, either one.
If you have a human trafficking situation and you turn it in and the police come, what happens to the person?
To the victim or to the person selling another person?
I don't like victim, but to the person who's been victimized.
Person that's victimized. In our operation that we had lined up, we had Katie from Turning Point on board, and we would be calling Katie to offer that person services, and it would be up to that person on whether they would accept those services, which on the first time, you know, it's kind of like an addiction. When you go to a treatment center, treatment doesn't always work on the first time, so it's about Katie making those contacts with people, and if not this time, then, you know, maybe at a later date down the road, they'll reach out when things are getting real tough.
And I just want to add on a little bit onto that as well. So human trafficking victims have a strong distrust for systems, for law, you know, because that's how they're groomed. They may have had a bad experience, like maybe there was abuse or something going on in the homes and they didn't feel like human services helped them, or maybe they had a run-in with law enforcement and now they're afraid of them. So it's having those experiences. So even if it's just touching base, being able to offer them food, get them clothing, offer them a safe bed for the night, it's building that rapport and having those good experiences with the victim so they know that there is some place that they can go when they're ready to go there.
I have a question. So the Baldwin veterinarian was very close friends to our family growing up, and my dad's best friend, and he was in our house and we were in their house, and camping trips and church and all this. And then when it broke, we hadn't seen him for a couple of years because we moved and just kind of drifted a little. But the first thing out of my head is, how did I not know this? Like, how could this be, you know? Are there any signs? Because now you look at everybody, you know, when somebody you trusted and knew, and he was like one of the greatest guys I knew, and now he was bringing women in from China. And so is there signs for spotting the perpetrator of the crime?
He was my veterinarian as well. And I had a sick dog for about a month, and I think I took him there every day for, I knew the operation was happening, and I still went to him because I didn't want to switch vets. But I had to take my dog there for 3 weeks straight. And I thought he was a great vet, a great guy. What we learned about him as part of this investigation, that is, his personal life was a hot mess, to put it simply. And I don't know what you do about that. We don't know what people do in their own homes or in the privacy of their own communications with others and who they're connected with. So I don't have a lot of advice for you there because I'm in the same boat.
I think that if someone's if someone's really nasty, no one's going to be attracted to them. Typically these guys are great guys.
That's part of the manipulation. She was talking about being a great guy and kind of flying under the radar, and that's part of the manipulation of how they are able to do this for so long.
And I think just to tag on to that too, with how many times have we heard about people who are, you know, in the news, there's always something bad that happens, and then there's the neighbor that says, I never suspected they would do this. Everybody has an at-home persona and an out-in-the-public persona, it seems like. You know, we all can cover stuff up for a little while, and I think that just speaks volumes. I would say 70% of the time that we are doing these presentations, we have somebody in the room who's been directly affected by human trafficking. And as Steve mentioned, I do this 2, 3, 4 times a week where I'm going out and doing these kind of presentations. So we talk to probably 10,000 people a year, and 70% of the time somebody's been directly affected. Sometimes it's, hey, that was my vet, or it is, when I was speaking to a school one time, I had a 9th grade girl come up to me after the class and say, you mean it's not okay for my boyfriend to make me do blah, blah, blah? To his buddies, so he can get their car for the weekend? It can be that simple. That this 9th grader didn't understand that that was not a healthy relationship. That is not what people ask other people to do. And so there is a spectrum of human trafficking and sexual exploitation that happens.
And I'm not sure if you can address this, and I would just ask for a little consideration on the news thing with what I'm about to say, just because his family still lives here and we want to be mindful of his children. But anyways, my husband did know him well, and we did know that he struggled with pornography and adulterous relationships, and he had people that tried to walk alongside of him, and then what happened from there, I don't know. But it makes me go to, you know, where's the root of this? And I know we can all take it back to Adam, but my question is, does this panel address that side, the organizations that you guys are currently with? Do we address the side of the people who pursue to do these things, so that, you know, that we're trying to understand why it is even happening? Or is this just particular panel that you just work on the side of the victims and kind of come back at it that way? If that's even appropriate, I don't know. I'm just curious now.
Sure. I mean, that's what that's the part that I talked a little bit about earlier, is that violence is a process. So that's why we start working with the youth to talk about healthy relationships, to talk about consent, to talk about body safety, and to think about the things that we allow people to do all the time to us. Talking about those things like I talked about earlier. But in regards to, are you talking more about like treatment or things like that for?
To identify, you know, do we, panels like yours or organizations like yours, do they try to identify, you know, why this is happening, why the surge, why are certain people, you know, more apt to go after, you know, to seek the victims? So in other words, if you know, we'll just hypothetically take the vet, you know, we knew he struggled with pornography. We knew he struggled with way out there kind of things that people did try to walk alongside of him and try to help him in. I don't know where it went after we left. So I'm just saying, you know, who are the people who are wanting this? Do we look at that, and how do we try to come, and are we attacking it from both ends, maybe, is what I'm asking.
I know that for our organization, now we don't do direct services, we do, you know, speaking is what we do, and advocacy on a policy end. But we do, a phrase around our office is freedom for all. And we've got a video on our website, fiercefreedom.org, and it was an individual who was addicted to pornography. And he was charged with child pornography because he had some child pornography on his computer. And he knew he had an addiction, and he couldn't get out of that addiction. And for him, the best thing that happened to him is when the police came in to his work, and he knew exactly why they were there. He looked at the police and he said, "Thank you. This is the start of something changing for me." And so, you know, we don't do necessarily group discussions or things like that about it. We do tackle pornography in talks sometimes. That's part of our menu of talks. But I think it is something that we need to be talking about on a regular basis. I know that there's a couple of churches in the Chippewa Valley who have Bible studies based around pornography addiction. And I don't know if you guys have something up in this area. You could probably talk about that. But if you don't, I would encourage the community to start something like that, because it is a huge problem, and it starts with pornography. Pornography is like the gateway drug, really, in this situation, because you need a bigger appetite and a bigger appetite. And there's a website, Fight the New Drug, watch some of the videos that are on there. It talks about how parts of your brain light up in the same areas that when you're taking like cocaine, and it's that gratification, and to get more, you need more, and you need more provocative, and then all of a sudden pornography is not enough, and you need to go into actually being with people, and then that's not enough, and you know, and so it continues, and it is an addiction sometimes. That's why we fully support law enforcement's demand suppression activities that they're doing, where they are staging some sting operations to get people, to bust people when they're trying to purchase somebody, because oftentimes when they do that, we don't see repeat in those sting operations. Occasionally we do, but sometimes that's the wake-up call that somebody needs, that, oh, this isn't a good thing, this isn't a healthy thing, and I need to go from there. We fully do not support any of the shaming activities that happen. I know some cities will put up billboards or things like that. In communities the size of ours, simply getting their face on a newscast or in the newspaper, that's shaming enough. We don't need to put them on a billboard, because like you said, there's family involved, there's kids at home, there's a spouse at home, there's parents, whatever. We need to wake people up sometimes to pull them out of something that they're in, but that doesn't mean that we need to berate them for weeks and months and years on end.
Right, and it's a lot. It's because of that, the opportunity. The opportunity is there, and that because the opportunity is there, and because there's some cultural stuff that supports it, people act on that. So I know that we want to know why, and we want to look for reasons or specific diagnosis or stuff behind it sometimes. But it's really like Jody was just talking about. It's the opportunity to be able to act on those things, and people taking advantage of that.
Well, certainly self-esteem of children have a lot to do with this. And I tell you what, when I see my granddaughters next time, I'm going to give them a great big hug. Another question right there?
Not necessarily a question, but so just from a standpoint of a parent, the helicopter parent, little story that this does bring it into our communities. I am a parent of a blended family, 12-year-old daughter who was groomed. And it's not men. It's not just men in the community. It's also women. So my stepdaughter was groomed by another woman, an older person from the high school, and was on her way. And I'm a helicopter parent. I watch her social media. I see her emails, and that's the only way I find these things out. Was that way, is being that helicopter parent and noticing the changes, and they were so small. The changes were so small. And so just awareness, I guess that's my biggest thing, is to say I'm a parent, and that's the only way I found out that this even, was such a problem right here, is by having it happen in our own home. Thankfully, we caught it early enough, and thankfully my child wasn't the only one involved, and so we were able to, it didn't get to the level of law enforcement. We were able to kind of nip it in the bud. But to find out how this all goes down in the grooming process, it does happen here. I can say that. And that same note, I also we work with Turning Point, but if people do want to get involved, I can't stress that enough to, it starts with the children. They're our future, and we need to do something. There is a panel through St. Croix County. I have a brochure if anybody wants one, but it's called the Citizen Review Panel. We meet in Baldwin. Sue Lindbergh is here. She's also a member. And what it is we advocate for the children of St. Croix County against, mostly our focus is neglect and abuse, but this has also become kind of high up on that goal for us. And so, just get out there, be a voice. As a parent, I just thought I'll never be heard, but I've decided that this is kind of if I don't advocate for my kids and my kids' friends, who's going to? So I can't stress enough to just get out there and be a voice.
Absolutely.
Well, my kids are all growing. Here? What? Okay. My kids are growing up, and I have grandkids, but they're not nearby. So I want to know what I can do. in this level, in this community, other than, talk to my friends, or most of my friends are just like me. Our kids are growing up and older, so we tend to be grandparents. So is there steps that I can do, or this church can do, or any of the churches can do that we're not doing very well?
Well, this is a great thing that you guys are hosting, this right now, and so we really appreciate that, and that is something that is stepping out there as a church, and even you're being aware of this. Really, to anyone, I would encourage you to get on our email list, because we're going to send up a follow-up tonight, actually, with some specific ways, because we've got some teams we're putting in place. Some of them involve prevention work this year in the middle and high schools, and if that's your thing, we're going to do some, we're going to offer a few different kind of teams and kind of let you know some of those, because we really are about matching people to their gifts and what their interests are, and that, because that's our whole vision is, we're casting light. So it's as every person stands up, with their gifts and their callings as a community. We do that. We are going to kind of chase away the shadows that this has been, even here in Hudson. So my primary one is, if you want to maybe sign up on our email list, we will definitely send out a follow-up tonight to everybody that was here with some specific things, and that will include even just some updates on some stuff coming up. But I think the churches, just by being aware that you can talk about things that a lot of people can't. I mean, you can sit here and you can have discussions as a church about some of the underpinnings of the heart. You can talk about pornography. You have in ways that not other organizations can, and all the different things that you've heard tonight. I think being able to kind of process that and talk about that even as the church. We are uniquely poised to be able to handle some of these things that are not everyone is able to address. But we'd love to connect you more.
Would also say, just a really quick thing, I know you're trying to close up, Steve, but any way that your church can fight vulnerabilities. So whether it's helping Habitat for Humanity, or doing a food collection for a food pantry, or helping collect school supplies for youth who don't have the resources. Any way a community can meet those vulnerabilities and help those vulnerabilities, we are helping to plug some of those vulnerabilities and some of those holes that traffickers can manipulate. And so being a big brother, big sister, being anything like that, any way you can get involved in your community, being a coach for a basketball team at the YMCA or something like that, being involved in the youth in our community, or having your church help those food pantries, or whatever that we can do to help housing insecure, or people who are struggling to make ends meet. Doing the stuff you guys are doing as a community, I know that. That helps, because that takes away one more avenue that a trafficker can get in with somebody. So, thanks.
Jody and Noah have to drive back to Eau Claire. So let's thank our speakers and our panelists for a very informative evening.